Good morning. I'm just going to let a few people filter in before we make a start. Okay, so we are at 10:30, so I will make a start. Thank you for those that have joined. This will also be recorded and shared later on. So good morning to those that are live here today, and for anybody else joining later, it could be good afternoon or good evening. Okay, let's make a start. Today we're going to cover off, is your P3M tool holding you back? I'm your main presenter today. My name is Andy Carter. I'm just going to move on to the correct slide for us. So just to introduce myself, my name's Andy Carter. I'm a senior consultant at CPS. I work in the modern work management team. I'm also joined today by Greg Hansen, who will introduce himself a bit later. My background primarily is I've been in the IT industry for around 20 odd years now, hence the grey hairs. As a result of this tenure in the IT industry, I've worked in many different organizations, some FTSE 100 companies. I've also had the pleasure of working as a technical project manager, a senior project manager, onto an IT manager, and then back around to a consultant. So I've got quite a vast range of experience of one, working with these tools, and two, having to implement them when I was an IT manager, for example. So I've been through the mill quite a bit. So that's my journey, and I'll kind of explain and step through that as we progress through these slides. As I said, Greg will introduce himself a little bit later on. So just a bit of housekeeping just to introduce who we are. If you're not aware, CPS, we are a multi-award-winning, multidiscipline Microsoft solutions partner. We have around 3 decades of experience in the industry. Our headquarters is in Reading. We have around 75 knowledgeable experts spread across all different practices within our Microsoft delivery team that basically can focus on any work within that kind of Microsoft ecosystem. We have around well over 200 plus clients across different sectors, and that may well be public or private sectors. If you want to know a little bit more, Greg will probably dip into that a bit later on. Just to give you a bit of an overview of what we will cover off today. First of all, we'll start to look at the basics of what a P3M tool is and what is P3M. We'll then start to delve into identifying when you should look to upgrade before you hit any kind of critical mass situation. And then finally, how to choose the best P3M tool. There are a lot of challenges when people come about going through that journey in choosing a P3M tool, and I will give you my experiences and knowledge of how to go about that in the correct manner. We will run a couple of polls, and I'm going to get Stella to just start one of those off for us now, or a couple of those off now. So if you want to feed back into that, primarily what we'll start to look at is pulling out what has been your main barrier to prevent you from upgrading so far. So if you'd just like to cast your votes in that, that would be fantastic. And that one does not surprise me at all. So that's fantastic. No, that's fully what I was expecting to see. So we'll move on. And what we'll now do is continue and look at another poll. So what I'd like to do now is just run another poll, which will be, let's get that one up, is basically to kind of understand a little bit about what you're currently running. So is your current P3M tool truly meeting your needs, or is it holding you back? And again, that certainly does not surprise me, that result. So again, I think most people that are in this kind of situation will certainly find that it will meet a lot of their needs, but you do often encounter those kind of issues and pain points. So again, it doesn't surprise me at all whatsoever, that one. Okay, so let's start off with understanding P3M tools. We will do a final poll at the very end, but what I wanted to do is kind of take you on that journey. So P3M stands for Portfolio Program and Project Management, if you weren't aware. I imagine anybody attending this call will have a very good understanding of the terminology and some of the acronyms, but these tools are designed to support project managers in planning, monitoring, and controlling their programs, resources, budgets, amongst other criteria. Essential features really include stuff like scheduling. Scheduling is a massive part of project management, and having robust scheduling functionality with visibility of things like milestones, interdependent activities, and critical paths are really key to any level of project management. Likewise with resourcing. Allocation, you really need to be able to rely on resourcing in many shapes and forms during project activities, because resources generally are the backbone of any kind of project delivery. And understanding the ability to allocate resources and manage and see the capacity and demand levels of your resources throughout that project lifecycle or your program or portfolio lifecycle is really key. And then finally, just another one that I always think is a key kind of milestone of those is budgeting. Now, budgeting exists in many different forms within projects. Some people will capture it in many different ways, and some people are more concerned about budgets alongside projects than others. But realistically, budgeting is a very key and interesting one. I work with a lot of clients that manage them in different ways. Some of them will be managed by third-party clients, such as Sage, for example. And they then may want connection opportunities utilizing stuff like APIs into their P3M tools. Now, in the real world, there is not a P3M tool that will replace anything like Sage or any of those other kind of QuickBooks or Xero type clients, because they are not designed to. They are merely designed to work alongside financing tools or to build upon financing tools in aid and assistance of project management. If there was a tool like that, I imagine the inventor of it would be a very wealthy person right now. However, the reality is, in this day and age, we are still in a situation where we do rely a lot on integration. So having those kind of abilities to integrate into those third-party tools is key. And that doesn't, that does kind of go hand in hand with those finance management tools. And then finally, one of the last ones I wanted to kind of cover off is RAID management. Now that sits into very different categories. Primarily, if we start to talk about RAID, we're still starting to think around risks, assumptions, issues, and dependencies. But it's more than that. We can start to think along the lines of things like lessons learned, changes that happen within projects, so change request management, and also benefit realization. We're starting to see a massive shift on project delivery going a lot further than and beyond a project. So when there are strategic goals aligned to benefits management, for example, we tend to find now that the actual benefit side of it is almost a project in itself. So who owns the benefit realization after the project has been delivered? The takeaway is that all of these functions are a massive part of your P3M tool. They empower your project management professionals to be more streamlined and effective in administrating one of the most critical elements, which is your project delivery. They shouldn't be time consuming. So the idea is any of that administration that goes alongside operating your P3M tool should be able to be simple, streamlined, and effective, enabling your project managers to empower themselves to move on to more critical areas of project management, such as communication. Customization is key. Now, the reason customization is key is because there is no product today that will give you a full out-of-the-box solution to meet your requirements and needs. And we saw that a little bit with the poll results. So in the realistic term of the world, every department, organization, and business has bespoke requirements. Now, that doesn't mean that you should always build your tool to meet those requirements, and I'll get onto that a bit later on. But in the real key terms, every organization tends to align to a framework. Now, within projects, there are many different frameworks out there. They are using the word framework by design. They're not designed to be followed to the letter and the letter and T to exactly what they should be doing. But realistically, what you should be doing is trying to align that framework and adapt it to your working and business practices. Therefore, you need a system that can be tailored to your needs, but also, like I mentioned earlier, a word of caution that you should not necessarily design the tool to meet your particular business process requirements today. Now, there is a reason for that, and I'll get onto that in a little bit more depth later. But in realistic terms, what we're trying to avoid is basically building a complex tool that may well go on and frustrate people just as much as your current tool does. And that is key. Now, when we start to break down into those particular areas, and I want to go in a little bit more detail in some of these. Planning and management. I mentioned this earlier, that this kind of sits into that kind of schedule side. When you start to look at that, resource plans, your structures, your schedules, managing your budgets, risks, and issues. Well, realistically, this is one of the most critical paths. And I can give you a really good example of my professional career where I've worked on very large projects. So many years ago, hopefully nobody will stalk my LinkedIn and try to work out who this particular company was and what project I delivered. But I delivered a project that was in excess of £3 million to a FTSE 100 company. And that went over a span of 2.5 years. Now, it was quite an ambitious project. They were a large group that resides within the UK. And it was basically a network transformation project. Now, at the time, the organisation I worked for did provide professional services, and I certainly worked to deliver those. Now, realistically, unfortunately, at the time, we did not believe as a professional service outfit that we needed to have robust tooling, and Excel was deemed to be good enough to deliver project management. And absolutely, it did work. I was able to deliver a £3 million project over the space of 2.5 years, just using an Excel workbook alone. So you're probably starting to think, well, okay, why do I need a P3M tool? Now, as the main project manager on this project, what I found myself doing is spending 90% of my day working on administration tasks within that Excel sheet. I was also the custodian of that Excel sheet. I was the owner of that Excel sheet, and I was the main maintenance for that Excel sheet. Nobody else really understood how it was put together, all the complexities and macros that I'd built into it, the lookups, the clever reporting functionalities that I'd built. And what I wanted to be able to do is pull it together in such a way that I understood it, but nobody else did. Now, that's a very wrong way of doing it. But it was successful in a lot of ways. However, one of the biggest risks it provided was what happened when I left that organization. Well, when I left that organization, the final parts of that project were very difficult to deliver. Also, if I ever went on holiday, actually managing the day to day, I ended up receiving several phone calls throughout that timeline where I would have to go in and assist and actually go on and do work because it was not feasibly possible to hand over a single shared Excel workbook with everybody that may look after that. So it presented a massive risk to that project. Now, we did deliver that project within budget, within time. From an actual commercial standpoint, we still made a profit. However, the profit that we made on that project was hit by around 20 points because of the amount of time I spent working longer hours doing all the administration that certainly shouldn't have needed to happen. So what would have been a better solution here? Well, certainly utilising the benefits of modern P3M tool sets would have been massively beneficial. Now, the reason for that is because a lot of them now are based in the cloud, and that's for good reason. It de-risked the fact that I had total control of the project. Now, that shouldn't have been the self, and I didn't deliberately position myself in that, even though I felt like I may have done. It was just because I was probably one of the better people at understanding the system that I put together to very bespokely meet that particular requirement. I would have definitely cut in time the administration time that I spent. So rather than spending 90% of my day spending time on stuff like administration of that tool, I would have been able to spend time attending more meetings, communicating more effectively with the resources out there, instead of relying on third-party help within the team to basically assist in that. So our overheads would have definitely been cut. But like I said, overall, the project was a success. it was just very difficult to do it. Now, looking back, I happen to speak to some of those people now, and they have certainly moved on and work in better ways using proper PPM tools. So there was some success that come out of that. And then we kind of move on to reporting and analytics. And this is another key one. We see a lot more of this now. The world is driven by data. And this is what I would start class as a staple of any P3M tool. We often speak with clients that, believe it or not, spend anywhere between 4 hours in a working week to a whole working week producing reporting packs for portfolio programs and projects. Yes, I couldn't quite believe those numbers as well. When I sat down with a client recently and they told me that one whole week out of every month they had to spend producing the reporting packs for their projects and programs, I was gobsmacked, though not surprised, because they were, again, like most people, trying to run off various different systems that were kind of stuck together in almost a duct tape fashion, and therefore the data manipulation was huge. They were having to transform that data and manipulate that data and put it into reporting packs in certain ways, and their tooling was not giving them the accurate and transformative data that they were requiring. So a lot of that time that they spent could have been reduced. Now that comes into play with very different things and different tooling, such as we'll utilize Power BI as an example. Power BI has the functionality to capture that information, transform your data in real time, and make those real-time analytics a possibility. Therefore, removing the inefficiencies of that administration time that an individual was putting together, and taking a realistic and real-time view of the world today. Now, if we think back to that use case I gave you where an individual was taking almost a whole week to put together that reporting pack, what it meant is when that reporting pack was becoming available to stakeholders, that data was no longer live. You were looking at data that was around a week old. So therefore, the actual effectiveness of their reporting analytics stack was almost negligible. So what you want to be able to do in the real world and in moving forward in this kind of journey is having that kind of real-time or near to real-time analytics that enables you to, identify stuff as upcoming blockers, upcoming risks and issues that you can, potentially avoid, common trends, that kind of capacity and demand that I mentioned earlier, and resourcing. All of that is possible when you've got real-time or close to real-time analytics. Also having stuff like a view of the burn down of your tasks, your milestones, and all of the budgets in your palm of your hand, because a lot of these tools now can be visible on the go in elements such as mobile phones or tablets. And that's why cloud-based tools are massively taking over, and they are the ideal solution for the modern project professional. So we move on a little bit to when you start to see the signs of the need for an upgrade. So what are the first signs? Well, let's start with what you should be doing if you aren't today. Ideally, what you should be doing is regularly reviewing your tool against your requirements. Now, businesses change, they grow, they adapt, they merge, they evolve. So why shouldn't your tooling? Again, being proactive rather than reactive and being on front of it is key. Ideally, you will hit and look at the reason for an upgrade at the very first sign of one of these, rather than when you reach that kind of critical mass point that I mentioned. Probably need to ask yourself a few questions. Are you reliant on that one system developer or system owner, like I was with that Excel tool? What happens if he or she leaves the organization in the near future? Is the product seamlessly capable of integration with other systems is another key consideration. And does it deliver all that you were initially promised? A lot of the times people will go and make rash decisions on project tooling because it fits a certain need. But are you just thinking short term? We all think of that simple tactical solution. Well, what about a strategic view of what you may need tomorrow? Do you need to find that you need to buy extra modules to make the tooling work? A lot of out-of-the-box functionality that comes with some off-the-shelf tooling sometimes will leave you wanting more. And that wanting more, unfortunately, comes at additional cost. So those are all the kind of things you need to take into consideration. And one of the other things is security. And this is becoming a bigger staple of this challenge now. So what about security? How is that managed? How is the vulnerability patching maintained? Is it safe, secure? Is your data backed up? And also, is there any data loss prevention policies in place to stop that data leaking? Because let's be honest, a lot of the data that you'll deal with in projects can be very sensitive because it may include client data or also obviously financial data in itself. So those are those kind of first signs that I'd always use. You've also got other ones that kind of sit in that need of the individual utilizing it. So if you start to find that the people that are using the tooling are becoming frustrated with the tooling, that is another one. So that's kind of evolve on from that. Now, the outdated features that you'll generally see in older products is elements such as resource allocation. Resource allocation can be obviously, with modern tooling, can be linked to individuals on a set basis in ecosystems that currently work in, let's say, 365, for example. It carries that functionality across that ecosystem with that P3M tool. So you can utilize stuff as notifications, abilities to update tasks and maintain tasks within other tools inside that ecosystem, while not necessarily having to go into that particular P3M tool to update tasks where they might not be a project professional and need to work in their day-to-day. So it gives those kind of flexibility of other users that are not quite necessarily familiar with those kind of project management terms, the project management way of delivery, but it gives them appetite and empowers them to be able to deliver into that tool quite seamlessly. Whereas if you think of some of the other tools that I've mentioned, you may have some additional challenges where people don't quite understand what you're trying to achieve. Obviously, flexibility of modern working patterns. So at CPS, we operate a 9-day fortnight. How simple would that be to implement into your project management tool today? With a lot of cloud-based tools, they are aligned to resource plans, they're aligned to working calendars and working patterns, so you can certainly simply update them seamlessly without any challenges. Cost tracking, and this is where you start to think of the likes of CapEx and OpEx. It can be seamlessly integrated into modern P3M tooling. If you're not ready to move to that one platform, like I mentioned earlier, there are still a lot of finance teams that don't want to necessarily change their way of operating and move solely into the likes of a P3M tool, but you can certainly integrate with modern P3M tools using elements such as API integration and power automation, for example. And then finally, risk management. Now, risk management as itself, like I said, is a massive staple, and it's a key ingredient of any delivery within projects. You can have in place controls and governance layers like never before. So not only protecting your organization, but the delivery and the end customer as well. So when you start to realize risks and issues, you can actually govern and maintain and report on them effectively ahead of time and making sure that you're transparent in that kind of communication policy. And we haven't really even touched on to the newer kids on the block, really. The likes of AI, leveraging the likes of, say, Copilot, for example, machine learning, large language models, and robotic process automation, for an example. Only the most modern P3M tools are designed and capable of working in that manner. That is because they're built on cloud technology and using cloud compute. So obviously, to leverage the most new age and most new and effective features, you need to start thinking about the current tooling that you're using. Does it meet and does it have the scalability for the next 5 to 10 years? And then I wanted to look at poor performance. So this is what I mentioned earlier a little bit. So negative impacts on your project outcomes. Well, let's say, for example, the amount of time that I was spending working on a particular Excel document while delivering a project, I would say that was not a good use of my time. Now, some of the clear signs of that were maybe sluggish performance in not just actual the system, but in your project professionals themselves. Project professionals, like many people, will get frustrated when the tooling is providing errors, negatively impacting their work life, has direct impact on their kind of data quality, that governance layer, the controls, their faith and belief in the system. Now, if you take that time and multiply that across every single project professional that you have in your organization and the amount of projects that you may be running as a project manager, those impacts can soon stack up. So is the tool frustrating those operators, leading to those kind of mistakes or the enthusiasm for delivery? Does it lack those kind of time-saving automations that can reduce the load on data entry or even double entry? A lot of the times when we speak to clients, we find that double entry is a key reason for them changing tooling. Does it constantly fail, crash, lose data, require lots of manual intervention to keep it functioning? That would be another clear sign that it's time to upgrade. And then what I want to do finally before we summarize is just how you go about choosing the best 3PM tool. Now, this is what's key, is how to identify your requirements. And I mentioned earlier, I would cycle back to about this being about building the system to your specific needs. Well, that's only half true. If you make the tool fit every single one of your specific needs, is it really removing the frustrations or inefficiencies of before, or are you just replicating the same problem into a new tool? And sometimes, unfortunately, we come across that. And that's where the likes of CPS can come in and assist. So the best way to go about defining your requirements are as follows. Think now, what must it do today? So what do you currently need it to do? What would you like it to do in 6 months to 1 year from now? Then think long term. What's the landscape for the next 5 to 10 years of growth for your organization? How would that potentially impact your choice in a P3M tool? Once you have all those requirements, are they all fixed and resolved by technology? Now, this is one of the key things we find always, that people try to have technology fix everything. Well, technology can't fix everything. Sometimes processes are broken, they're suboptimal, and they will need review. So don't make your suboptimal processes necessarily fit in with the technology. Review every single part of your delivery landscape and your delivery processes and cycle, and review how they can best utilize with technology. Can you, in fact, then leverage what the product can do today? Does that still give you enough, and can your processes adopt to the current technology that's available? So rather than making the tool fit your needs, can you make your needs align better with the tool? These are really kind of key mistakes that I see people do when they try to engage and start to build out requirement sets, that they always think that the technology is the answer and let's just build everything to meet our needs. But they are really kind of simple and key considerations to make. The next part is a little bit more complicated, and that's where I'll let Greg have his moment to shine in a moment. But then you need to start considering the cost. Now, as technology moves to the cloud, pricing and licensing change, and it becomes a lot more complicated to understand. It used to be straightforward, a costing exercise in the past, where you could just buy a product off the tool, you'd have an annual fee, and that would be it. But you need to consider additional costs. What about development costs? Is it better to develop a product rather than having an off-the-shelf product? What's one better aligns to those needs? Then support. Who is going to actually support your project, your product in the long term? And what does that cost? Is it something that's self-supportable? Is it built on a low-code environment, for example? So with some education and hand-holding from professionals, you can actually go and maintain the platform on your own. Then finally start to review the features. But don't just think of today. Does that product have a roadmap? What platform is it built on? Is it scalable? Does it integrate with other tooling that you use today, or can it in the future? So that's kind of the steps that you should always go through with those considerations. So let's start to summarize what we've discussed today. So what we've looked at is P3M tools. They can range from very different tooling, so you can have those open source to very pricey enterprise solutions. They don't all have to be pricey. It really depends on your particular requirements. It's important to consider the total cost of ownership, including those licensing, the training and support costs. Different P3M tools have different features, so it's important to choose the one that aligns mostly to your organization's unique needs, but also considering those main features such as your resource management, budget tracking, and team collaboration. And then start to understand, like I mentioned earlier, if it mostly aligns, what needs to adapt? Is it the tool or is it the organization? But it's also important to choose that P3M tool that's compatible with your existing systems and your workflows. So can it seamlessly integrate into that finance application, that HR, that CRM, the ERP solution that you've got? That's one that you really need to consider when you're going through that journey of selecting the right tool. Now, I've been through this myself as an IT manager in the past, and you will have many people give you very different ideas on what is the best solution to present. Now, the best solution is not always the first one you come across or the one that Gartner recommends, but it's the one that you spend time working on the requirements and the people that will actually help and support you on that journey. So that's the end of the presentation. I'm just going to add a little bit of time for any questions, which I'm going to get Stella to put up one final poll as well, in case anybody doesn't have any questions, and then I will hand over to Greg.
Very good morning, guys. Great session today, Andy. Oh, sorry, you're still going?
It's all right. It's still on the poll. It's all right. That's fine. So they might not all be on there, but I just wanted to kind of get a grasp of what currently people use as a P3M tool. If it's all any of them, it might not be any there. We've got others on there that I haven't listed, like Monday.com, Jira, Trello, all those types, but just wanted to get a bit of a view. That's fine. We'll move on. We'll move on from that. So what I'll do, Greg, is I'll hand over to yourself.
Excellent. So yeah, as I said, thank you, Andy. Great session today. To briefly introduce myself, my name is Greg Hanson. I'm commercial sales lead at CPS. I've worked at CPS for less than a year, but I've got over almost 10 years experience in IT sales and account management. So why do we get results? We love problems. Our years of experience means that there's not typically an issue that we haven't come across before and overcome. We value relationships. So building relationships naturally is at the core of our work. We like to work with people. And finally, we shift perspectives. So it's important to understand all perspectives when going through a project. So this is anything from a frontline user all the way up to the C-suite. Focusing on people makes a successful business. And Andy, if you don't mind moving on. Excellent, thank you. So how can we help? So with regards to a business case, you can use our experience to create a compelling business case to take to other individuals in the business. Are you ready? Prereqs. We need to make sure that before change happens, you've considered all the different variables. And then change management. We take a huge amount of care in ensuring your team will adopt the new tool effectively. So I guess the next steps with regards to this, and I suppose our offer as part of this webinar, is that we are offering an hour's free consultation with one of the team to get you started on the journey. What they'll try to do is they'll try to understand your existing technology, processes, any problems you have, and then determine where you could potentially be falling short. And if you don't mind just going to the next slide, Andy. If you're ready to reach out to us, you can follow us on socials. You can go onto our website. You can reach out to me directly. Yeah, however you prefer to. But we'll stay on for a few more minutes anyway, just to answer if you have any more questions. Yeah. And then finally, Andy has actually just published a blog, which I believe will be coming onto our website today, I think it is. But also you can hear the latest news from Ignite through our socials or through our website. It's constantly being updated. And thank you very much. As I said, we'll stay on for a few more minutes in case any more questions come through. I think I did see a question coming through actually. And I'm not sure if you can see it, but do you want me to read it out to you? Can you hear me, Andy?
Sorry, I was muted.
Yeah, okay.
Typical technology error there, right? Go for it.
Yeah, so one of the questions, another one's just come in. So How can we effectively implement and ensure the adoption of a new P3M tool across different departments in our organisation?
That's a really good question, and quite a difficult one. Well, there's different ways to do this. I always say that it's good when you're working with different organisations and different departments, different challenges. Like I said earlier, the tools are designed, or the best tools are designed to kind of meet bespoke needs. You'll find, like I mentioned earlier, that every kind of department and that has different ways of operating. Now, in an ideal world, we would all standardize our operations to make them fit, and we'd have the nice, robust, and simple processes. But in reality, some of these departments may have existed for a long time. I always like to use finance and HR as a great kind of use case for this, that they've got their working practices that have to work alongside a lot of legislation and stuff. But generally, what we would always work to do is work with those departments and kind of set out individual workshops for them to kind of understand and build out those requirements. So if you understand the requirements of every department that your project delivery touches, and then use something like a change manager or some kind of champion for that business or that technology area, that certainly helps involve it. We've had a lot of success in the past by kind of adopting that approach, but also making that we make sure that we work with those kind of departments closely, because we always find that they have the most robust and complicated requirements of them all.
And there is actually the next question is a really good question as well. So, how can the advances in AI drive our decision making for tool selection? What benefits does it bring to the table?
Again, that's a really interesting and good question. From my experience, like most of us, the inclusion of AI, it was not completely a surprise, but to land the way it has, within our technology space, I think it's probably been one of the biggest, kind of changes in our landscape since cloud computing come along. And cloud computing's been around for a very long time now. AI and that kind of generative AI, large language models, those kind of things have a massive impact on the kind of day-to-day and administration tasks that, like, even myself carries out today. So I find, coming from a project management background now into consulting background, I can see the benefits massively outweigh the negatives for utilizing AI. I recently, not so long ago, attended a project showcase where I gave talks and demonstrations of using AI with P3M tooling. A lot of the questions I got asked from project managers, and I will say project managers that have probably been in the game for a very long time, that they're probably 20 to 30-year-old senior veterans of the kind of project management space. They were concerned about the impact it would have on their livelihoods and whether AI would replace them. The reality is AI is not in a position to replace anybody, not in any foreseeable future. I could never say never, but what it can certainly do is optimize the way that we think and react with administration tasks, for example. One of the biggest key areas I see it helping and assisting organizations when I talk to them is taking away some of those remedial tasks that every project manager hates with administration. It cuts that almost in half, as a kind of guideline ballpark. I can write a business case for a project in seconds, and it will give me a very, very good view of what should be included in that business case. It helps me get that kind of messaging across when I'm trying to communicate with stakeholders. But what it can also do, if you think of the flip side, is the data analytics side. It can actually do some of the stuff that we could all do as humans, but it can do it in a fraction of the time. So it can analyze that data, identify those trends, and kind of see problems before we can. I've seen this a lot potentially now on, model scenario-based planning. So say, for example, we were running a project and all of a sudden the resources had to come to a stop. Well, what's the impact on that project? Now, I could sit and work that out myself. I could re-baseline and replan my project and kind of see what the impact is. But what would be a better way is if I could have AI go and remodel that project based on that criteria and do all that hard work for me and give me the end results. And that is where we start to see the massive time saving.
I don't think there's any more questions that have come through yet.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for attending. As Greg mentioned earlier, I have also published a blog which should be online hopefully this afternoon, and the recording will also be on the website. So thank you all for attending, and thank you, Greg, for supporting today.
Thank you all. Cheers.